Back in 2009, I produced a cartoon animation about a caveman who decided he wanted to be able to retire at some point in his life. That caveman was the only caveman in the universe, and he had to figure out a way to save for his own retirement, assuming it was even possible. This caveman lived a very simple life, and he only ate potatoes to stay alive. Essentially, the only thing he had to do was dig up potatoes, eat them, and sleep. That would keep him healthy and happy. However, he was really bored with this existence, and so he wanted to figure out a way that he could save potatoes for the future so he could take time off from having to dig potatoes every day. In essence, the caveman wanted to be able to work or dig potatoes for 10 years, save some potatoes for 10 years, and then be able to take 10 years off in retirement. The caveman eventually determined that if he tried to save potatoes, some of them would go rotten, so he had to save them at a faster rate than he was going to eat them during retirement. Using very primitive math skills, the caveman eventually determined that if he saved 52 potatoes every day, he could meet his retirement goal of being able to live in retirement for 10 years without having to dig any potatoes. Unfortunately, in the real world we live in, the caveman grossly underestimated the amount of potatoes he would have to save that were constantly going rotten while he saved them and worked his way up to his retirement goal. His biggest mistake turned out to be not allowing for potatoes to continue to go rotten while he was living in retirement. This is the spreadsheet that the caveman originally used to do his potato saving analysis. As you can see, he only analyzed during the period of time he was actually saving potatoes. He didn't bother to do the workup for the 10 years that he would be retired. Accordingly, he grossly underestimated the number of potatoes that he would have needed to save, considering the loss rate, which was 50% a year. The retirement planning spreadsheet is normally used to determine retirement needs in dollars. Here, I've configured the retirement planning spreadsheet to simulate the potato digging and saving experiment. The spreadsheet shows a lot of cells with dollars in the area. Disregard the dollar sign. The numbers you see in this spreadsheet represent the number of potatoes involved in this analysis. The key point here is that the caveman wanted to save potatoes for 10 years. So here I've represented that is number of years worked. Also, he wanted to be able to live comfortably in retirement for 10 years. Now, the caveman needs to eat 10 potatoes every day, or about 300 per month. And so I represented his retirement needs as 305 potatoes every month. I'll also point out that statistically, the caveman would have to save 50% of the potatoes he dug every day in order to put them in his retirement savings account. Again, this is a function of these two values here. Years worked, years retirement, because he's going to live for 20 years after he starts work. Now, the caveman experienced actual potato losses that equaled about 50% of everything he saved every year. That's a huge rate. The losses were caused by potatoes going rotten because he had to keep them stored in a hole in the ground, something we called a potato cellar. Now, to help figure out the numbers, I made another spreadsheet. This time, spreadsheet went out for 20 years. It covered the 10 years he was digging and saving potatoes, and then the 10 years he was living in retirement. Now, the key thing about this analysis is that it was determined that at the beginning of the 10th year of retirement, he would need 7,320 potatoes in the cellar if he was going to survive for a year, losing half of these as he went along. So we use this number and the what-if analysis tool in Excel to compute the number of potatoes that would need to be saved every year. And that was this number here, 7.5 million potatoes. And if there's any doubt about how this works, we can run through the spreadsheet here and take a look at the numbers. We'll pick this number and then we'll select our cell and look at the dependents. And you can see all the cells that are dependent on this value. And it's pretty much everything in the spreadsheet. So by figuring out this number using the function built into Excel, based on this number here, we were able to determine how many starting potatoes needed to be put away into the potato cellar every year. And I will tell you, 7.5 million potatoes every year for 10 years just to be able to end up with a little over 7,000 going into the last year is crazy. And to show you how that worked, I'm going to make note of the fact that we want this to be 7,320 as a number. So we'll go here, enter 0, which zeroes out everything in the spreadsheet. And then we'll go to what if analysis goal sheet. And this cell should be 7,320 based upon value in this cell here. And we'll compute it. And as you can see, we got 7.5 million potatoes. Back in our retirement planning spreadsheet, knowing the number of potatoes we need in our potato cellar at the beginning of our retirement years, and let me jump back, that would be this number here. We need that going into our 11th year. Then we could take the number of potatoes needed, which was 7.5 million, plug them into this cell, and then use the what if scenario built into Excel to compute what the equivalent inflation rate, which is the same way as thinking out of the loss in potatoes, based upon a need for about 3,600 potatoes every year that need to be eaten when you're in retirement. So applying a inflation rate to that number during the period of retirement gave us 7.5 million potatoes that were needed the day we start retirement. And it turns out that the inflation rate that matches those numbers is a 70% number. That's a big number. So basically the potato loss rate for the 10 years you're in retirement is 70% per year. Now if I go back here and set my inflation to 0, you can see what it does to our numbers. For 10 years, we would need 36,600 potatoes. And again, we're dealing with a need for 10 potatoes a day to feed the caveman. And that means that the spreadsheet has accurately predict what we needed. Back over here, We'll put back in our 70%. Actually, the number is 70.4, and we get our number back.